Welcome, everybody. So today we are extremely lucky to have the wonderful Louisa all the way from America coming to talk to us about her life and her work and the amazing things she does over there. Thank you so much for joining us, Louisa.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so great to meet another Louisa. I know you go by Elle, but we had to do something, even though we're across the pond, we had to do something.
Absolutely. It's so cool. So few Louisas.
I know.
Amazing. So I don't want to say it wrong, which is why I've given you a really vague introduction. Could you explain to our lovely audience who you are and what you do?
Yes, absolutely. So I work for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and I oversee essentially Southern California. I could say all of the different locations, but I'm sure that would get lost in translation with being in the different locations that we are. So, but what we do, first I'll just tell you a little bit about my story. I actually lost a friend to suicide when I was in high school. And I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do at that time. In fact, when that happened, which is eons ago since I was in high school, I felt like it was so stigmatized that I didn't know who I could turn to, didn't know who I could talk to. I actually didn't even know if I could call it a suicide. And so it was many years that I felt like I suppressed it. And it really impacted even my own mental health. And then fast forward 2 years later, working with many foster youth who experienced a lot of trauma and had their own ideations and attempts. And so it really just started to come full circle, and it brought up a lot of my past. And so I thought, I really need to do something more with this. And so now I work for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and I've been doing this work for about 6 years now. So I train people in suicide intervention training. I am just always focusing on connecting with more people, talking to more people, in the hopes that we can just save one person's life. I mean, if I'm hoping that we can obviously do more, but even if it is just one person's life, then I will feel successful in my role.
That's just so fantastic. I think it's an incredible thing that this foundation exists, and like you say, helps reduce things like stigma and gives people places to talk, whether that's someone that's ideating themselves or whether that's someone like yourself that's been in that situation where you've been impacted by that.
Right. And so what our organization does is we really focus on, pretty much anything suicide prevention. We are trying to be the forefront of that, trying to be the leaders. But mainly what we do is focus on research. So we are the largest private funded researchers in the US. And so right now, I think we're at a total of 38 researchers and about $26 million that we've invested into research for suicide prevention, which is amazing.
That is amazing.
And so all of that allows us to understand, suicide is going to look different for everyone. Mental health is going to look different for everyone. But what are those commonalities that could help us to help others? We know that suicide is preventable, yet it's one of the largest statistics that we have in the US, and I'm sure even in the UK too. And so we take what we've learned from research to inform us on how we can do better and how we can really help ourselves and help save others. And then we also focus on education. So we are educating the public about mental health and suicide prevention. We are working with community members to healthcare workers to police force, anything you name it. We are constantly trying to work with different various workers and the community to ensure that we are being safe. And then also we have support for those who have lost someone to suicide. So if you have lost someone, then you can call a program that we have called Healing Conversations, which is all volunteer driven. And what we do with that is someone who has been through a similar loss can connect with someone who has experienced a recent loss and just talk to them about what life is like and provide that lens that even though they may not have been in the exact same shoes, they've walked in similar shoes before. And so what were resources that were helpful to them at that time? what was some advice that was helpful to them at that time. And so that is mainly what we do, but I'm also constantly working with the media, making sure that people are safe with messaging, and just really trying to get the word out.
That's incredible. What a fantastically holistic company. What a foundation, I should say. That's quite incredible.
Yes.
That they're covering every base there, aren't they? There's nothing
Everything.
left. Oh, that's incredible. Absolutely. So I am guessing that your helpline and things like that is going to be internal America only. So I'm going to say to the audience, if you're not in America and you are listening from the UK, I'm going to put some links in the YouTube box, in the podcast description. So then if you're affected by anything that we are talking about, because it's pretty heavy stuff, there are ways of getting support and help out there. And I will do my best to signpost throughout, even if it's not in America.
Yes, that is great. And actually, I looked it up beforehand too, and I saw that there are a few different options for people. So there's 111, and if you call option 2, then that will connect you to the mental health crisis support. There's also the UK National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And then I did find out too that there is a text line, which is amazing. We have a text line too, and that's been really helpful for those who don't want to call. Maybe if they're sitting with a friend and they are talking about them being suicidal in that moment, calling or texting and having that support line is really helpful. And just if you aren't, you want to just connect with someone over text via instead of the phone, because it's sometimes harder to talk about it than it is to text.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, years ago now, but I used to volunteer as a helpline volunteer for an eating disorder association. And we got a lot of, I mean, it was MSN Messenger back then. That's how long ago it was. But we used to get a lot of people contacting us using the Messenger service, because like you say, sometimes it's just easier to put your feelings down into words, and it's not, I don't know, it's not as confrontational to yourself almost to have a conversation, but other people like it to be able to pick up the phone as well. So it's great to have all those options open, isn't it?
We've gotten so accustomed to texting everyone and being so online and not having to talk that sometimes it is just so much easier to do that.
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of our audience here is likely to be estate agents, realtors, and therefore business people. So they're working in an office environment. And I'm thinking as a manager, as a boss, as a business leader, could you identify some signs? I mean, if someone's down in the dumps, then that can be obvious, but equally, it's not always. So I wonder, as a business leader, are there certain things that you would recommend we look out for, or anything like that? I don't know if that's a sensible question or not.
Absolutely. And just as humans, I think that it's so important to do that. I think it's really important to be paying attention to what people are doing and what people are saying. And if there is an inclination of it, to really, put on your radars and just start diving a little bit deeper into that. And so the 3 main areas that we usually like to say are talk, behavior, and mood. So really looking out for those 3 different categories. If a person is talking about feeling very hopeless, if they're talking about killing themselves, obviously that's going to be a huge warning sign. If they talk about, even if it's a little bit more vague, like they have no reason to live, or they just want to make it all go away. They don't want to be here anymore. They don't want to be a burden for other people. Those are different things that when people are talking about that, we really have to be alerted to and pay attention to, and then start diving a little bit deeper. And in their behavior, if you see someone who is all of a sudden having an increased alcohol or drug use, for example, and picking up some other habits like that, looking for a way to end their life, whether they've researched that online or they're just really more curious about that in the shows that they watch and they start talking about that, or you see that. Maybe withdrawing from activities. If you invite them to do certain things, or even if it's in the work environment and they don't want to come to certain things, and you see that as a pattern, all of those things are changes that we really need to be aware of. And then in their mood, I think if you see someone who, we all go through all of the different moods, right? We're all on this roller coaster of emotions in life. But if you start to see someone who's really stuck in that depression, or you start to see that they have a lot of anxiety or loss of interest in, their work that they have been so dedicated to for so long and are now really withdrawing from that. Maybe it's even agitation, or maybe they're more irritable. Things like that are all different things that we really have to pay attention to and start having an honest conversation. One of the campaigns that we have is just have a real conversation with someone. And oftentimes we think about it in this way that is so heavy and it has to be so serious. But really, you can just start a conversation with, how are you? What's been going on lately? All of those different things are just easy ways to start talking about it. And I think what people have to understand too is, if you start to see these warning signs, if you start to engage in some of these conversations, you also don't have to be the one to fix the problem, but it's really just linking them to that support and to those resources. And so I think that it is, again, just really important to almost dumb it down, right? To just say you're just having a conversation with a friend, a coworker, a loved one, and it doesn't have to be such this heavy, big thing that's looming over you in that.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great thing to say, that actually, if you, as a boss, as a manager, if you notice something, then you can have that conversation and you don't have to fix it. I think, as a business leader, you've got so many plates spinning. Mm-hmm. You're not going to be the best person to fix it, even though you want to, and that's admirable. But actually, it's more of a signposting opportunity than adding another plate to your shoulders, when actually you're not the best person to deal with it anyway.
That's exactly it. I think the biggest thing for me that I've learned is how to be a good listener, right? And I think that the world truthfully needs more listeners. And so oftentimes when someone has gotten to that place of feeling very hopeless, they just want to share their story. They just want to share what has gotten them to that point. And it may not be, that same experience that someone has had may not be something that you or I would think, gosh, how could that get you to this point? But to them, it has. And so we really have to understand their own lens, right? What they're feeling with the events that have happened to them, or what they're feeling with that overwhelming stress that we have. And oftentimes we talk about it in the sense that, if you were in the worst pain of your life and someone were to stop and ask you for directions, you probably wouldn't be able to give them those directions, right? Because your mind is just so focused on that pain. Well, just like with that physical pain, it's exactly the same thing with the mental pain. And so we really have to just kind of pause and let them talk and just listen, stop. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to interject, even if it's an awkward moment of silence or they're just rambling on. We just have to stop and listen in those moments.
I think that's actually good advice for salespeople in general. Stop, listen more, and don't be afraid of the silence. I know when I train salespeople to be salespeople, I teach them the value of silence and try and get them to respect that. And so I think all of that, if they've been to my training, then they've got those skills. They just need to use them in these same situations. I think that's really, really interesting. What about if a member of staff, or a member of your team, sorry, a member of staff, I hate that phrase, sorry, ghastly thing to say. What if a member of your team came to you and said that it wasn't them that was feeling that way, but they were trying to support somebody else that was feeling that way, and they were struggling because they, I know you said don't treat it like it's a big thing, but if someone comes to you and says that they're feeling that way, I think you can be impacted by that. How could we as business leaders, as team members, help our colleagues if we know that one of their friends, relatives is feeling that way? I don't know if that's a good question again or not, but
no, it's a great question.
Anything specific we could do from your research?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that it is, one thing that I do want to clarify is that it is a really big thing. right? So to ignore it or to maybe discount it and say that it's not a big thing, it really is, but I mean more to like let go of the weight of it, right? So if someone is saying that they're thinking about suicide or just even that they're in a very serious state of depression, we should definitely take it seriously. Anytime that someone mentions that, we always take it very seriously. And so I think what we could do though is just talk to that person in private and talk about how it's also impacting them with understanding and having that information, what that weight feels to them. And so being more of a resource for that person who is almost trying to absorb all of that emotional weight that someone has then just given them, right? And so I think that it's important to pause, give them the respect and understanding and empathy and also let them get all of that off their chest. But also I think the support that I would tell them is to talk to that other person in private, make sure that you're constantly checking in on them too. It's not just a one-time conversation. Unfortunately, with a heavy conversation like that, you're going to need to check in on someone. And even if their mental health has gotten to a better place, still just checking in with them, right? Because oftentimes it could be that roller coaster where it very easily just goes back and dips back into that less hopeful place. And then also I think that they need to tell them that they care about them, tell the person that is struggling that they care about them and remind them. And, you know, really asking directly if they have said indirectly that they're thinking about suicide and you're unsure or that person is unsure that that is indeed what they're talking about, ask directly. Be frank about it. Are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about ending your life? Because if we say an ambiguous statement like, are you thinking about doing something stupid, which implies judgment, but sometimes we care so much that it ends up coming off that way. And so we need to just be mindful about the words that we use and how we're phrasing it. And also be direct, because if we say again something ambiguous like, are you thinking about hurting yourself, that could mean a variety of different things. It could mean that maybe they're cutting, maybe they're just going to go out drinking for the night, right, just to numb the pain. But that's a very different thing than wanting to end their life. And it's also important too to ask directly, because one, you can get that statement, right? And you can see for sure if that is indeed what they're talking about. But also, research has shown us that if we do ask directly, it is not going to plant a seed into someone's brain that if they are thinking about it, they will say yes, or even you'll be able to see it in their body disposition. But if someone isn't, then very quickly they'll be like, no, what are you talking about? That's not at all where I was going with this. And so it'll just pivot the conversation. But you definitely need to ask if someone is directly thinking about suicide. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. I think that's a really good thing I think it's a really good thing to highlight, actually, because especially English people, I don't know, British people, I don't know, maybe that's a sweeping generalization and an awful thing to say, but I imagine that a lot of Brits would find it difficult to ask something quite so directly because it's such a big thing. And I mean, we're the kings and queens of euphemisms, aren't we? So we tend to dance around things, and we're always so terribly polite. And I mean, we're not Canadian, we don't go that far, but yeah, I think that's a great thing to highlight, that actually just asking the actual words, are you thinking of killing yourself, or are you thinking of committing suicide, it's a big thing to say, but it could genuinely give you the answers that you need to make sure that you're signposting your friend or colleague to the right places. And if you've got a friend or colleague that's having to deal with that, then you can give them that advice as well, and then you can help them, signpost them, and just be there to listen. And I think just being open really helps. By the sounds of it, it sounds like, you know, if it's when you try and hide these things that possibly things get worse.
Right, totally. And you know, I think it's also important too that if someone is indeed in a crisis, it is important to deactivate their plan. So if there's any lethal means, pills, firearms, whatever it may be, to deactivate it. Of course, if it's safe for that person, though. I don't want to put anyone in harm's way. And so if a plan is not safe, then just directly call for help right away. But if a plan is not actually in place yet, but that they have it in their mind, just help to take away any of those barriers that could be at risk for them. And also stay with them to help them call the support line. You know, again, maybe they've never contacted someone before, and that's a very scary thing. To admit it to a total stranger can be very scary. And so just stay with them and help them, or even if it's you calling and being almost like the translator to that person is really helpful and supportive. Or even if you're just texting that text line together, you know, that would just be a helpful support to have that there. I think would take away a lot of that weight as well.
Absolutely, yeah. That sounds. All of those sound really good ideas. Lots of options for tailoring it for the right person in the right situation. Absolutely, that sounds awesome. So, excuse me. If what do you do if actually you think I might be heading that way? What do you do to, I mean, rescue yourself, help yourself? How do you broach the topic with other people? Any hints and tips for anybody that might actually be having these kind of thoughts themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I think it's also really important too to be talking about how even if we're not at that place, I think it's important to come up with a plan that if we ever did get to that place, that we know who to call, we know who to reach out to. I mean, our mental health should be just as important as our physical health, and oftentimes it's not. And so, just as much as we exercise and we take those proactive measures for ourselves physically, we need to do that mentally too. And so, whether that's getting a support counselor or getting a therapist, I think it's really important to take those proactive steps. I would encourage everyone to get a therapist. I think it's great to be able to talk to an unbiased person about your life, you know? And so I think it's important to start there, right? Know what those numbers are if you are ever in crisis, and also know who your trusted people are that you could connect with, whether that be a friend or a loved one, a family member, whoever it may be, but just have that list, and also have a list of what self-care looks like for you and some coping skills, because, and healthy coping skills, right? We all have those unhealthy ones too, and we all do that sometimes, and that's okay, but just understanding the boundaries with that and understanding when those negative things turn into something that could be even worse for our mental health. And so for me, self-care looks different every day. And sometimes I told you before, but I have twins that are 3 years old, and I have a full-time job. And so, in fact, I oftentimes talk about it that I have 7 different jobs, and that I'm just juggling all 7 different jobs of being an employee, a wife, a mom, a friend, a family member, an advocate, and then to myself, which is also a job. And oftentimes I put myself on the bottom of that list, and it's really important that we move ourselves up that list. And no matter what, you know, the more that we take care of ourselves, the more that we'll be able to do all those other jobs, right? And unfortunately, we don't have enough hours in our day and in our weeks to do all of those jobs perfectly. And so sometimes we have to put ourselves first, knowing that we're not going to be the best employee, knowing that we're not going to be the best friend, right? Whatever that might look like, but it's really important that we figure out what that self-care is. So for me, I love going outside, and whether it be going for a hike or a walk, or maybe self-care some days is just literally taking a shower, right? It's just that time for myself, and those moments of opportunity that you have to do something literally just for you. And that's really important. And if someone is in crisis for themselves, that they're going through that moment, it's really important that they reach out for help right away, to call those lines that you're going to put in the text later. It's really important that they reach out for help right away.
I think it's really great what you said about looking after our own mental health. I was speaking to Serena from Whole Shift Wellness earlier in the series, and she was actually saying exactly the same thing, that even though she's a fitness instructor and she's a food nutritionalist, I probably mispronounced that. She's a lot of other things as well. But she was saying exactly that actually we don't have a lot of tools for our mental health taught to us. We know that we need to exercise and have PE classes, or phys ed, I think, in America.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But you don't get those kind of meditation classes as part of your normal schooling, or just learning that actually taking a shower and really luxuriating and really sensing the water on you and the lather and smelling the soap, and all of that can be a real mindfulness experience. So then actually you can treat it as a self-care moment, even though in your many hat wearing capacities, you don't get lots of time for an hour of meditation or something,
Right.
sort of that you traditionally think about self-care. You can find it in other ways. I think that's really really cool.
And I think the key word that you use there too is mindfulness. And so oftentimes do we need to be cognizant about exercising that mindfulness. The act of taking a shower, like you said, with the very sensory of the water and smelling the soap, like I was envisioning a shower at that time and just how peaceful that it is, right? But it could be anything. It could be, going for a walk and just not thinking about work, just totally disengaging for a minute and just taking everything in, the sounds, what it feels like, everything. It could be making coffee. I love making coffee. I probably should not drink as much as I do, but I'm a mom and a working mom, and also I probably need more this morning, and it's night for you. But I love the whole process of it. I love brewing coffee and smelling coffee and just hearing it. And so sometimes we do need to exercise that mindfulness to just really appreciate these little moments that we have for ourselves during the day, where normally we're just going about our routine and it just becomes so routine that we just kind of disengage and we're on autopilot. But really kind of taking ourselves out of that autopilot and being mindful in the moment can really help with your self-care and adding to your mental health bucket.
I think that's a really, really great place, a really positive place for us to stop. I don't have any other questions myself, because I think you've just been, so I can't think of the word now, I've gone to say it, so complete in all of your responses. You're obviously extremely passionate and expert about what you do, and I know I'm very grateful to you for sharing your time and expertise with us. We'll pop some links in the description so people can contact you or your team and your foundation if they are realtors in the US. And
Absolutely.
Of course, we'll do the same for other countries if we can find what we think is the right information. Like I know you've got a few of the English ones. And I also know from my time at medical school that if someone was at immediate risk of killing themselves, committing suicide, then they can actually just walk into an A&E. They don't have to make an appointment to see a GP. They can just go into A&E, and the staff are trained in an accident and emergency department to help you in that crisis moment.
Yes, that is so true, and that is a great point, and I appreciate you having me on here. If I can also come up with some links too that could help if people want to get more involved and just want to advocate for suicide prevention or just really share your own story. That helps in and of itself too. I appreciate that you shared your story today on this podcast, and that's very brave. And I know that just by doing so, you've helped someone else. So the more that we can do that in this world and in conversations helps someone else and also helps to decrease stigma. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for the opportunity. And it's a worldwide cause, and it is something that is preventable. So by just having this space to be able to talk about it has been so helpful, and I'm appreciative of it. So thank you.
Thank you. Have a lovely day.
You too.